Hey everyone, and welcome to our video on the mammalian nervous system. This is part of our Module 5 Part 5 series where we're having a look at those plant and animal responses, and in this video we're going to be having a look at specification reference 5.1.5G, the organisation of the mammalian nervous system. So before we delve into how the nervous system is actually divided up in our mammals, then we need to just remind ourselves of why we've got to have this ability to interact with our environment. And there's two kind of key principles here that we should be aware of. First one, it's all to do with detecting those threats that might obviously threaten your ability to survive and allowing you to respond appropriately to that situation. And secondly, it's all about giving us the best opportunity to get the supplies we need for everyday existence, so food, water, etc. Right, in terms of the divisions then, starting with the most basic division that we find, and this is one you should already have encountered back in GCSE, our nervous system is divided up into the central nervous system, CNS, which is your brain and spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system, the PNS, which are basically all the bits not the brain and spinal cord. If we just take a moment to think in a bit more detail about the brain first of all. So our brain is primarily composed of these relay neurons, and they've got multiple connections between them. The whole reason that we've got these relay neurons with all these multiple connections is because it means that each of them can then create multiple links to other neurons, and therefore we can develop these very complex neural pathways because there's large numbers of them all interconnecting with one another. When we think about what the brain is made from, there's two types of matter. You've got grey matter and you have white matter. So most of the brain is actually made up of the grey matter, and this is non-myelinated cells, so cells without that myelin coating around the outside. The white matter are the myelinated cells, and the reason that we call them grey and white is because that's just the colour they look. We're very creative at this point, as you can tell. So the grey ones look grey because they're not myelinated, the white ones look white because they do have myelin around the outside. If we then think about the other part of the central nervous system, the spinal cord, then we do have grey and white matter here as well. So in the centre of the spinal cord, that's where we find those non-myelinated relay neurons. So that's our central grey matter. And then the outer region is going to be the myelinated neurons, and that is the white matter. And you can actually see it in our little diagram. I say diagram, it's a nice little photograph of someone's spinal cord sliced open. So what we can see is that white colouring is all of the white matter, and then in the centre you can see there is that little grey, almost X shape really. Now the key thing about that white matter, it's myelinated, remember, and if we've got myelinated neurons, they have the ability to transmit action potentials rapidly. And that's the purpose of that white matter in the spinal cord, is to carry those action potentials along it, obviously to get to the different regions of the body quickly. Let's change our focus now then onto the peripheral nervous system, PNS. And the peripheral nervous system is going to be divided into these two systems, sensory and motor. Now the whole idea of having this peripheral nervous system is to have this rapid communication between those sensory receptors in whatever part of the body they may be in, your central nervous system, and the relevant effectors to bring about the response. So the sensory system and the motor system are being part of this peripheral nervous system. If we think about the sensory nervous system first of all, then what I've given you down at the bottom is just the picture of a little sensory neuron. So what we've got, our little receptor cells are up in the top left of our diagram there, and if you have a look we can see we've got the dendron, which is the bit that runs from the dendrites, the little endings on those receptor cells. We have the dendron, which is that fibre that runs down to our cell body looking like that weird little alien head in the middle. And then we've got our axon that goes along to the axon terminals, which will connect to the central nervous system, because obviously this is a sensory neuron, so it's going from receptors to the central nervous system. So what's going to happen here then is once those receptor cells have detected some kind of a stimulus, then the dendrons of that sensory neuron are going to then enter the central nervous system. So that conducts the action potential from the receptor cells to the central nervous system itself. The second part, the motor nervous system, this is all about conducting those action potentials from the central nervous system to the effectors, the bits that are going to actually bring about the response to whatever it was we've just detected. And our motor system is actually further divided into two systems: the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is all about those voluntary body movements. So these are the ones where we are actually consciously thinking about what we're doing, basically. So we've got three types of nerve that make up the somatic nervous system. The sensory nerves, obviously made from only sensory neurons, and they're going to be running from those sense organs to the central nervous system. Motor nerves, made of only motor neurons, carrying the impulses from the central nervous system to those effectors, the muscles and the glands. And then we've got mixed nerves, which are actually a combination of both sensory and motor neurons. And a good example of that would be the spinal nerves in our spinal cord there. If we think about the neurons that make up the somatic nervous system, these tend to be myelinated. And this just ties into the fact that these are going to require rapid transmission of those action potentials. So because of that, we myelinate them because that increases the speed of that transmission. And what we then find is that we've got a single motor neuron that connects the central nervous system to the effector in our somatic. So 2 points there. First one, they're myelinated for that rapid response. Secondly, single motor neuron connecting that central nervous system to the effector itself. The other division is the autonomic nervous system. Now, if you look at the word autonomic, then auto, think of another word we have with auto in it, automatic. And that's the easiest way to think about it. Autonomic nervous system are those involuntary functions, the things we're not having to think about to have take place. So your heart rate, peristalsis, blood vessel diameter, all of those are still being coordinated by part of your nervous system, but we're not having to actually bring about conscious thought to make it happen. It's just happening in the background. Now, what we're able to do is take our autonomic nervous system and divide it further. And we're going to divide it down into the sympathetic nervous system, which is all to do with the fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is all to do with rest and the digestive system. You can also think about it as the sympathetic is to do with activity, whereas your parasympathetic is all about conserving energy. The key features of our autonomic nervous system then is the neurons of that autonomic nervous system tend to be non-myelinated. If we're thinking about things like your heart rate, etc., that doesn't actually require rapid responses. Therefore, non-myelinated neurons work absolutely fine. We also tend to see at least two neurons involved in that connection between the central nervous system and the effector. And those neurons are connected at a region called the ganglia. Now, we've mentioned this autonomic nervous system is subdivided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems. And these are actually antagonistic to one another. So what we're seeing are basically opposite actions in those two systems. So when we're at rest, the action potentials pass along neurons of both systems at a relatively low frequency. If, however, we get a change to some internal condition, that can lead to the change in the balance of stimulation between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And because of that, we're then going to get a response. And obviously, depending on which way the balance is in favour, determines what that response would be. So what I've got here for you is just a simple little diagram, just to try to give you a summary about some of those effects we could see based on either the parasympathetic or the sympathetic being stimulated. So if we have a little look at the parasympathetic first of all, you can see we've got things like constriction of the pupils. So obviously that's the pupil getting smaller there. We're going to see things like constriction of your bronchi. We can slow down the heart rate. We're also going to see digestion being stimulated. So we've got a range of effects there, and it's all to do with maintaining that homeostasis. On the other side, the sympathetic, we've got the inverse of those, because if our parasympathetic is constricting the pupils, then our sympathetic is going to dilate our pupils. We're also going to see the bronchi relaxing, we will see an increased heart rate, and we're going to see a slowdown in the rate of digestion. So basically what we're seeing here is the sympathetic system is all to do with that fight or flight response, whereas the parasympathetic is where we're just in that rest state, that conserving energy state. So if you know one of them, and a few examples here, then you can just use the opposite to get what happens in the other system there. As always, I hope you found this video useful, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can see when the next video is uploaded, and of course head on over to the website where you can see a range of other resources to help you in your A-level biology studies.